Hi, and welcome to our weekly mini lesson. This is actually two mini lessons put together because doing the one would make no sense without doing the other one. So this is going to be a little more than a mini lesson. I apologize for that. But I do want to put these together. Actually, I think what we'll do is I'll record them separately. So I'll record part one and then I'll record part two. But, okay, here we go. Part one, major battles and figures of the Civil War. So the first battle, and I really only mention it because it is the first official battle of the Civil War, is the first Battle of Bull Run. The strategic goal, I think previously we had talked that the Union had three strategic goals that it needed to meet. It needed to blockade the Atlantic coast, it needed to take the Mississippi River, and they needed to take Richmond, the capital of the Confederacy. So this was about the taking Richmond, and you can see on the map that the army's marching from Washington to Bull Run, or if you're from the South, you would know this as the Battle of First Manassas because it's near Manassas Junction. Why the South has different names for all the battles, I have no idea. But in any case, so Bull Run Creek is where this battle took place, and it took the Union Army 4 days to march 25 miles. That's not great. It allowed the Confederacy time to get more supplies, get more men, and basically challenge the Union more effectively than they would have had the Union put on a little more speed. So the Confederate force was pretty much equal to the Union force by the time of the battle. The Union soldiers were pretty green. They ran away from the fighting. They actually trampled. There were people that came to watch the battle and eat picnic lunch because they thought that this was going to be good entertainment. This was before cable and TikTok and things like that. So they thought this was going to be great entertainment, and they actually got trampled by Union soldiers, some of them to death, as the Union soldiers ran away from the Confederate. They had gotten more troops, and the Union soldiers got scared and ran away. So really the only thing to say about this battle other than it being the first battle, was that it really showed that this war was not going to be easy or quick. It was going to take a long time. It was going to be very bloody. It was going to be awful, and nobody would want to watch it while eating a picnic lunch. Okay, so the East was, let's just say, not going well. We're skipping over a bunch of stuff in this, by the way. The East was not going great. And so early in 1862, Lincoln decides, okay, let's focus on that Western theater that we need to get a hold of, that we need to capture the Mississippi. So he's going to enlist a guy named Ulysses S. Grant. Grant was a colonel at this point, not the very model of a modern major general, if you get my meaning there. He was not the model soldier. He was typically out of uniform. He was a drunk, but his men loved him. Any command that he ever had, his men absolutely adored him and would fight to the death for him. So Lincoln decided to give this guy a chance. And so he sends Grant and a bunch of guys down first the Tennessee River, headed for the Mississippi. And their goal is to take the Mississippi River. So after a few months of that, it's April of 1862, and Grant has come to an area that will become known as Shiloh. It's actually named after a little hut, a little kind of house thing that was on the property. But in any case, his 66,000 men are going to go up against 44,000 Confederate men, and this is going to become, at this point, the bloodiest battle of the Civil War to this time. there's going to be other battles that dwarf this, but we're talking 13,000 Union casualties, 11,000 Confederate casualties, but it is a victory for the Union. The Union keeps the field, the Union keeps moving forward. And that's kind of Grant's whole thing. It's called Total War, and I don't have it listed on here, but it was a very big thing for Grant that no matter what happened, as long as you had enough men to keep moving forward, you kept moving forward. You only retreated if you absolutely had to. Whereas the commanders in the East were very prone to retreat if they lost more than a couple thousand men. There were Union victories that turned into Confederate victories in the East because the commanders retreated rather than holding the field, even though they really could have held the field. That's not going to be a problem with Grant. So anyway, Grant is coming down the Mississippi, and at the same time, Admiral David Farragut is coming up the Mississippi. Farragut has captured New Orleans, Baton Rouge, and Natchez, Mississippi on his way. So the two are going to meet at Vicksburg. Grant and Farragut are going to meet up at Vicksburg. That's the only town by 1863 on the Mississippi River that is still in Confederate hands. So really, that strategic goal is almost met by the end of 1862. It's only Vicksburg, Mississippi that remains. Now, Vicksburg is going to be a heck of a battle. It's going to be a siege. We'll talk about that coming up actually in part 2. But again, Farragut, just like Grant, didn't take losses into account. He kept moving forward regardless. As long as he had the men to keep moving forward, he kept moving forward. So back in the East, and it's time to talk about Antietam. Now, we're skipping over lots and lots of battles, just FYI. But this battle is important because it's one of two where General Lee, the main Confederate commander, the primary guy here, he's going to slip into the North and attack in the North. That's pretty important. For the most part, the belief was that the South really just had to hold their own borders. They didn't need to attack in the North. But Lee believed that attacking in the North occasionally would lead to some panic in the North and maybe help secure a settlement. Now, ultimately, that doesn't happen, but that was the belief in any case. So Lee gets into Maryland. He gets past McClellan's army. I think the stratagem was something to the effect of, hey, look, something shiny. So in any case, McClellan is going to catch up to Lee when they're up in Maryland, and they're going to fight near the town of Antietam. Lee only had 40,000 men. McClellan had upwards of 100,000 when it's all said and done. So Lee is, of course, going to lose this battle. They are going to lose heavily, and Lee is going to retreat, and McClellan is not going to follow him. And I think the vein in Lincoln's forehead has to be standing out about, to there after this battle, because Lincoln was probably yelling at the telegraph operator, attack, attack, and McClellan is not doing it. McClellan was famous for waiting for things, and in this case, had McClellan captured Lee after the Battle of Antietam, wow, this war would have been over a whole heck of a lot sooner. They probably would have captured Richmond a whole heck of a lot sooner. But that doesn't happen. So Antietam now becomes the bloodiest battle of the Civil War to this time. 12,000 Union dead, 14,000 Confederate, just barely edging out Shiloh for that. Well, I think that was actually just casualties in general, not dead. The Confederate casualties amounted to about a third of Lee's army. It's going to become harder for the Confederacy to replace these men as we go here. The Confederacy is going to have to call upon men that are much older as the war goes on, simply because they're running out of people otherwise. And again, McClellan's hesitation allows Lee to escape, and Lee survives to fight another day. And just a couple of aftermath pictures from the Battle of Antietam. I don't know why all of these soldiers were put in a line. I don't understand that. I don't think one photographer did that, so I'm not sure what happened there. So now's probably a good time to talk about two of the big-time commanders of the Civil War. The first one, George McClellan. McClellan was one of the youngest generals to ever become a general in the Union Army. He was a top flight graduate from the U.S. Military Academy. On paper, he was really, really smart, and he was great with like logistics and planning and things like that. He was not a great battlefield general. But he manages to get promoted to not only being a top planning general of the U.S. Army, but also commanding the sort of preeminent army of the U.S. Army, that being the Army of the Potomac, stationed in Washington, D.C. Now, Lincoln was really concerned about putting one guy in charge of both of those jobs. McClellan actually replaces the legendary General Winfield Scott as the top planning general, and then he's also the battle commander for the Army of the Potomac. And McClellan convinces Lincoln that he can do this. What's kind of interesting, and I think if I had been Robert E. Lee, who we'll talk about here in right now, I would have been rubbing this in McClellan's face every time I saw him. But Lee was offered the command of the Army of the Potomac before McClellan was. Before Virginia seceded, Lee had been the commandant of the U.S. Army Academy. He had been a top general in the Union Army, and Lincoln offered him command of the Army of the Potomac, and he went home to think about it, and Virginia seceded while he was home thinking about it, and so he ended up seceding with his state. He went with his state. And Lee was an incredibly talented general, ran circles around McClellan and most other generals the Union put up there, and there were several that were put in charge of armies that went against Lee, and Lee beat pretty much all of them until Ulysses S. Grant comes into the picture. But McClellan just was outmatched by Lee entirely, and McClellan was more prone to run away. I think his youth made him a little more skittish. Okay, so after Antietam, Lincoln has the political cover necessary to launch really his masterstroke, and that was the Emancipation Proclamation. This freed the slaves anywhere that was in rebellion. So that did not include states like Maryland, Kentucky, Missouri, Delaware, that had slaves that had not gone with the South, okay, that had not seceded. So that's a very important distinction, and one that's probably going to be on the test, is that distinction. So please make sure you have that in your notes. So this had, at the first, very little actual effect. But as the war goes, this is going to be a tremendous tool because it's going to promote enslaved people escaping and joining the Union Army by, and we'll talk about that here in a second, but that has a major effect moving forward. This also has the effect of ending any hope that the Confederacy had of England coming in to save them. The British had gotten rid of slavery about 30 years prior, and the British public was not going to stand for their country supporting a slaveholding power against a non-slaveholding power when the issue of the war was now ending slavery. Prior to this, for the Union, the issue had been preserving the Union. For the Confederacy, the issue had always been slavery. That was really their top issue. For the Union, it was just all about bringing the Union back. Now it was going to be about bringing the Union back and about ending slavery. They were going to have kind of two major goals. So African Americans will join the Union Army in droves, and also women will come to the Union lines, and they will end up traveling with the Union Army as well. African Americans were referred to as contraband when they would come to the Union lines, but African American men were able to join the Union Army, and by the end of the war, by 1865, 180,000 African American men were in uniform for the Union. Some people ask, well, surely there were African Americans who fought for the Confederacy. Not that I can find reliable historical evidence of. There are certainly people that claim to have that evidence. I have looked at that evidence, and it's pretty sketchy, just to say the least. So I really can't find evidence of African Americans fighting for the Confederacy. They were a little leery to give former enslaved people guns and say, "Follow me into battle." You're my property, but follow me into battle. Yeah, I think they would have been shot in the back. So in the U.S. Navy, there were African Americans serving in the Navy. They did serve side by side, black and white together, although African Americans did tend to get the sort of nastier jobs, your kitchen duty, your latrine duty, things like that. In the Army, African Americans did see actual combat, but they had separate regiments commanded by white commanders. So at this point, African Americans couldn't be promoted in the military. Now that's going to change by the time we get to like World War I, World War II. You are going to start to see African American commanders in those positions. So that will improve as time goes on. All right, so that's the end of part 1. I'll be back with part 2. You can watch that one as well. Great, thank you.